like I'm floating through the air. The pain I felt is paid for, all is said and done. Oh, I am restricted, fixed upon the web. I need to kick the habit that my mind is breathing in. Break out, I've got to see. Spent all my life holding all of it closely. I played it innocent, a feel of discontent. I'm finally facing it all, fearless. Burning the bridge that keeps us. I'm here and I'm feeling fearless. Exaggerated, that's what you assume. The story's over now, I must conclude. I am conflicted, watching where I step still, hanging in the balance. Not the life I want to live, I want to take it all. Standing tall, fear outweighed the person you are. Oh, break out, I've got to see. Spent all my life holding all of it closely. I played it innocent, a feel of discontent. I'm finally facing it all, fearless.
My heart rages around like an ocean in my head, because there are so many things that I left unsaid. I can almost feel you walking in the distance, but I know that is not reality. If you are echoing around inside these parallel dimensions all alone, know I'll find you in my dreams.
I didn't think Zerglings, morphing into orcs would work, but
No, I didn't either.
it's been a privilege working on Zergorks.
Hi, I'm Scott Johnson, the host of the World of Warcraft podcast, The Instance, and today I'm sitting here with Chris Metzen. Chris,
Scott, it's good to see you, man.
good to see you. How you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's a crazy time. We're about to launch The War Within and, really kick off this massive World Soul saga, which is a trip because, I haven't shipped a video game in, 8 or 9 years. So it's kind of wild going through this process again and just kind of feeling that anticipation, excited to see what people think, and when the product finally gets into people's hands, it's one of my favorite parts of the whole development process.
Well, let me ask you this question, because you reminded me of how long this has been going. I remember firing up the World of Warcraft OG vanilla World of Warcraft and seeing a trailer that said, celebrating 10 years of Warcraft. And I remember then thinking, you gotta be kidding me, that's insane. That's how long I've been playing these games. And now we're 20 years on top of that, 30 years total. That has to be a little overwhelming, especially given that you were here for most of that, had a bit of a break, now you're back. Does that weigh on you? Do you feel the heat from the time? Like, how do you feel about how that entire process has gone?
I don't feel kind of heat or like the weight of time, relative to expectation. It's really weird, being a little older, a little wiser. Feels like 100 years ago, feels like 5 minutes ago, all at the same time. So when I look at this World Soul Saga, the stuff we're building right now, thankfully there's an immediacy of it all to me. It's just, we live and die by, how good, the things we're sculpting in real time is. Trying to hold it all in your head, the weight of the past, it's kind of beyond me. I can't really wrap my head around like all the history all at once. I mean, there's kids graduating college right now named Jaina and Anduin. It's like, what? I often find it's not all that helpful to overdwell on, in the course of development. You want to keep it focused on what you're doing at the time. So that's how I try and balance it out. One day I'm sure I'll look back and go, wow. Working on this game again has really given me more of an immediate sense of gratification that just kind of keeps you focused in the moment. And that's generally, where my head is at on a day-to-day basis.
When you mentioned people naming their kids after characters that you created, that you named, and that you developed and saw grow and evolve and everything. Something that's interesting about War Within so far, to me, is we're seeing the gang kind of back together in a much more complete way. So you're seeing Anduin talking to Thrall with Jaina nearby, right. And Khadgar, my favorite worst wizard of all time, but I love him. He's there, they're all there. Yeah. And what that tells me is that we're in for some coming together of a lot of strings, a lot of stuff that has been out there for 20 years that will finally converge in some meaningful ways. Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I'll break it down. When I came back, I'm like, all right, let's go, World of Warcraft. Like, what do we got? What are we making? And they were in, they had already been doing War Within, or what would become, War Within, for about 10 months. While I liked what they were building and thought it was a cool next chapter in WoW, in my head, I'm like, for the 20th anniversary of WoW, like, I want to have a feeling, like whatever the product becomes, I want to have a feeling of pulling all the toys out of the toy box, right? They like older characters, the kind of macro themes that, the series has been about all these years, Titans, Old Gods, Light and Dark. I wanted to feel like the anniversary was capturing, like this kind of mix of all of the core flavors, and ultimately proofing out that there has been this storyline all the way through, that everything kind of converges into this crescendo. And in a very real way, how the War Within was shaping up, they're like, yeah, dude, like there's no way on earth, right? That that's going to divert the course of Mighty Rivers. There's no way to get that done on top of what we're already in production on. So that begat this idea of a larger saga. I'm like, okay, well, what if we can get there in X number of steps? What if we can build to something just ridiculous, but it might take a couple expansions to do. And somehow, folks, bought in on it. Like, whoa, that's wild. Let's go. And so, Taryn Gregory and I, Taryn's our, principal story developer. So we work together every day, and you know, we talk a lot about like, we want to involve all these epic characters, but like when they're in the scene, they eat all the oxygen and they could just go off and solve for X. So it's this balance between including all these mega characters and then finding clever ways to get them out of the way, you know, so that the player has maximum agency and the newer characters we're introducing have space to breathe and live.
It sounds like it is almost an advantage to come to something that had already been started. If you'd come to the end of Dragonflight and started from there, that's a little big, it's a bigger buy. It's like, well, wait a minute, where are we going now? We've been flying, okay, what does that mean? What do we do? And instead, you were presented with some beginnings, and then you got to decide where those beginnings took you.
And vector it a little bit, you know, the trick to, after all these years, you know, creative direction, which even today, I don't know that I could do a thesis on, right? Creative direction is as unique as the person doing it and the chemistry of the team that you're working with. But kind of finding that balance again of having strong ideas and kind of saying like, I want to go this way, right? But the team had already been, you know, kind of constructing this thing. So it's a mix of maximizing kind of the things that they are most passionate about, the ideas that they're kind of dug in on, and finding a way to bend everything towards a singular purpose, but boosting their sense of ownership.
So when you got up on stage at BlizzCon, it was pretty magical for players. I can say that for myself, and a lot of people that I know, and a lot of fans of the game saw this as a return to something. And I think we're coming off an excellent expansion in Dragonflight, but you got up and did something that surprised everybody, which was, we're not doing the normal, here comes the next expansion, here are the features, here's the storyline in its basic way. We are going to do a trilogy of essentially games. You spoke a lot about bringing, you know, tying up some loose ends, but also creating a saga that is 3 parts, at least, and setting up really the next 20 years of the game, perhaps. That's very different than what any of you have done up to this point. Mm-hmm. Did that present unique challenges to the way you wanted to create story, the way you wanted your characters to progress, these sorts of things?
Yeah, it created all sorts of complexities. You know, under the hood a little bit, it's interesting in how, when I came back on the team, the development process and even the conceptualizing process, you know, like where does the expansion take place? What are the main themes? What's the focus? Really had become much more democratized, right? And people were, you know, had kind of found their voice in the balance of all the special teams that comprise the World of Warcraft team. You know, they'd really built the vision of Dragonflight together. So as I came back in, woohoo, and you know, there were folks going like, oh wow, how is this going to change our dynamic? You know, in terms of, you know, being a creative director, like, will we still have a voice? Will we still, you know, have stakes in how this all shapes out? So, like I was saying earlier, kind of learning that again and learning that balance again and coming in as creative director and be like, no, you know, I'm not here to be, you know, hyper prescriptive with everything as I might have been as a younger dude, but like really listening for the team's instincts. Like what are they responding to? What do they want to build? What do the artists want to make? What are they imagining in terms of that pure vision? So on top of that, the complexity of, I mean, I don't think this gives up the ghost on anything. Like, we're building 3 of these at a time. This is, yeah, I'll say it. It's insane. It's insane, yeah. Right? On top of the team, you know, over a year ago, having committed to like an 8-week cadence. Yeah. So these folks are, we are moving so fast, you know, and so the difference here is, you know, guys like Taryn and I have to map out where we're going, like way ahead of the caravan, which is its own really interesting kind of work, right? You know, checking in with everybody. Does this feel cool? Everybody hip? You know, I want to make sure that we're building things that, you know, not only, again, my instinct feels are cool and fun, but that the team is proud to build and that they feel they have a voice in and, you know, can express themselves through where the story's going, what the ideas are. We're already mapping out, you know, whatever, you know, 13.1 and 13.2 and how they actually play out and connect, and it's wild, but in a way you get to step back and see a far more cohesive vision and a, you know, far more refined idea over time. So, and without, you know, again, without, you know, spilling any beans, it's like, you know, honestly, we're already talking about, you know, the next few, you know, post, you know, upwards of like 17. And it's just keeping the conveyor belt going. You know, it's like we're loud and clear. You know, the fans want more content, you know, more regularly. So, in a way, just staying ahead of that curve and making sure that everything, again, is of purpose and telling this much longer story. It's been a blast. You know, the pure creative on Warcraft, you know, for the past year and a half has been, how would I put it, over such a long span of time. I want to say it's one of the most nuclear creative phases I've seen for Warcraft. But the pace is wild, right? Like the pace is wild. And it's like I ain't 30 anymore, so we joke around all the time like, you know, we need to start instituting, you know, company naps in the middle of the afternoon for the old folks. But it has been pretty amazing.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Speaking of personal connections to characters and story, somebody close to you, who I think is a very wise human, once said, online somewhere, that Chris is Anduin in some ways, kind of worn out, beaten up by a straight period of like nonstop work, right? But also on the other end of it, he's a little bit back to being Thrall again. And those two characters represent these two parts of who this person is. How much of these characters moving forward, or even in the past, have represented you where you were in your life? Like some people say, well, the early versions of these characters are they were so metal. Like even Tauren chieftains, they look like, you know, these metal dudes and everything. And now they're aging, right? They're maturing. They're moving on in the world. Like you are, like everyone who's worked on this does, like that's time. Do you think that's a fair thing to say, that we'll see these characters change and evolve in the same way that maybe you have, and that they're kind of your avatars?
Yeah, no, I know where you're going. So there's kind of an A and a B there. Like the B, which is easier, is certainly we want to push these characters forward. We want to show some aging. We are currently doing that. But yeah, we talk about that a lot. There are many new characters over the arc of the saga that we don't want to be just one-off. We want them to be, you know, pals and, you know, working together to, you know, solve these big problems. But certainly the characters that have been around a while, we're trying to kind of find a way to like capture that age up, not necessarily age out, but like, okay, so in that cinematic at BlizzCon, you know, they went in and put like gray streaks in Thrall's hair. I'm like, oh.
It looked great.
It got me. It's like, whoa. And just Anduin, you know, staring you down. It's like our little boys all grows up. You know, it's.
You feel for him. You're supposed to feel for him, right?
Which was the point. But just the idea that these characters are moving through their own continuum and progressing and moving through stuff. Like, what a trip! You know, looking back from where we started. To the point where these are, you know, fairly fully realized characters within this setting, and it's just incredibly satisfying that way to see that progression. And certainly us as storytellers, as people, you know, as we, you know, it's not necessarily, it is certainly getting older, but it's also just experience over time. You know, big life moments, becoming parents, finding love, finding your career, all these big kind of life, you know, hurdles. It's like, you know, I tell folks all the time, like, don't be afraid to pour yourself into this stuff, you know, even when you're like, oh God, will the people down the hall dig it? You know, will I be judged? Like, yes, probably. But the answer is you're an artist. Go get it, right? Find your truth. Because often when, you know, we're pulling from a place of like deeply personal experience, someone's going to feel that on the other end of the line, you know, as you're playing the game. It's like some of those themes that really matter. Whether you're a writer, quest designer, narrative folks, cinematics, you know, like the game design, you know, like everyone kind of pours themselves into their craft. And the more genuine that is, and I think sometimes the more risk you take, I think you get more genuinely affecting content. I think people feel that, they feel you in it one way or another. There are many themes embedded in the World Soul Saga, evidenced by different characters, that are very pointedly things that I think today, or I'm struggling with today, for sure. But again, I think about it in terms of like, as the team's, you know, creative leader, that's not the job as much. I often think the job is like trying to learn to call them out, you know, and challenge them to kind of breathe their own experience into it, as opposed to pouring my own in. So it's a balance.
I assume that's what over time, you have a character. We'll stick with Thrall for a minute. He's, you know, probably the most well-known of the Chris Metzen, and certainly voice him. So
Until they find somebody better.
Until they find somebody better. Maybe you'll age out of it. I don't know. We're getting there. But no, that you've breathed enough life into that character and given them enough direction over so much time that I have to think, in a lot of cases, they start to run on their own gas. And while I'm not asking you to tell me if there's any tragedy coming at all, we're not even suggesting it here.
I have a kill list.
Do you?
I've got my top 12 characters. Like, they're all going.
Why is Khadgar at the top of the list? I kid. I love Khadgar.
There's no kill list.
All right, good. But you know what I mean? You might find yourself going, well, it might be time for character X to take a character dive.
You know, so there's no, I'm kidding, there's no kill list necessarily. But we do talk about this stuff all the time. And the only, you know, when you start talking about knocking off main characters, it's not a small thing. And usually that is in service to, in the general story you're developing, if you really need to punctuate, you know, dramatic stakes, the easiest thing to do is ask Lucas, blow up a planet, or, you know, knock off a main character.
Tyrion Fordling, for example.
Tyrion.
Remember that?
Yeah, I do.
I remember that.
I'm still gripping on that one.
Yeah, that was rough. No pressure, though. I'm just saying it was a rough moment.
No pressure. You know, so we do talk about it from time to time, but we try and frame it with, you know, the greatest gravity possible, and trying to be clear that, you know, this franchise has another 20 years in it. You know, it's this big ongoing idea, and losing critical characters is costly. So it's, you know, we talk about it from time to time. I won't tell you we won't lose anybody over the arc of the saga. Those types of moments are all about establishing stakes and that emotional, you know, engagement from the player ultimately. So, you know,
does it help populate the World Soul Saga as a creative place to know that over the last few years, while you were gone for much of it, the team has made a real effort or a priority out of having allied races discovered in the world that players can not only unlock but then be and might prefer over the originals or whatever. Like, this additional diversity for choice seems like a really potent way to fill your world with more interesting characterization rather than just, well, it's orcs and humans and a few others.
Yeah, I love it. You know, just old school D&D and, you know, all these options on, you know, player expression, what kind of, you know, what culture you want to be from. I love that kind of stuff. So opening that up, especially like, you know, Battle for Azeroth and, you know, the inclusion of all these new silhouettes and flavors or whatever, I thought was awesome, actually. And even the ones I didn't think I would play, I wound up, you know, I rolled a Volpera hunter, and then I consistently dress him like Robin Hood from the old Disney movie. So it's like, I actually really dig a lot of the flavors that have been added over time. Like, it's in my opinion, the water's warm, everybody in the pool. You know, I think WoW can stretch and grow to, you know, encapsulate all of these flavors. I think giving, you know, players more options, more visual options is awesome. At the end of the day, I think, you know, erring on the side of, you know, player choice, player agency is the right move. Like, why you're playing this game in the first place, right? When you imprint, especially when it's your character, when you imprint on a look or a vibe or, you know, like a vision that you connect with, it's like, go, get it.
So let's bring it full circle to what is imminent, which is the war within. Players have a lot of expectations. Some of it is based on just excitement because there is a 3-part saga coming. They're not used to that. There's a whole new structure to this. So what would you say to players who are pins and needles about this next expansion, the start of the big grand story?
As we were talking about earlier, we've never been in a situation where we've shaped the whole giddy up, you know, all at once. So there's the adventure component of the War Within, and then there's the max level campaign, and then there's the, you know, the subsequent patches. And it's all been designed to kind of play out over time. You know, narrative threads and sinews, kind of, you know, linking everything together. Personally, a little biased, but I think it's off the hook, right? At the end of the day, I would want people to remember it is still only, however, part one of a much, you know, a much larger narrative. And I would want people to look at it that way. You know, it's meant to rise and, you know, crescendo with its own max level campaign.
Will I be expected to walk in Quest 1 and yank the sword from the planet?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I would say to that, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, the sword, the resolution of the sword that we started with at BlizzCon, Actually, that's a 13 thing. We're going to build to that, and it's a doozy.
One does not simply yank a sword from Azeroth.
I would even say you are not prepared for that moment, and leave it at that. But it is a 13 issue. Ultimately, you know, things like Xalatath, we've been doing a lot of work to kind of build her up as a very different kind of villain. She is not like a Deathwing type, you know, villain where, you know, just he's flying and burning everything and like, oh crap, you know, we're gonna, you know, like clearly he's where the storyline ends. She's built in such a way that like we're gonna be confronted by her and face her multiple times over the arc of the saga. So it's not going to be this, you know, one and done type like, oh, you know, she's the raid boss. You know, she's meant to, you know, kind of weave in and out of events over time. So that's something I would say. But definitely the sword thing sticks in my head. You know, like certain of these themes are built to play out over time. So I hope people are into that. I hope they're into, you know, a longer form engagement. Because in a way, you know, so many of our expectations kind of, you know, crystallize around like, well, wait a minute, I didn't get the full meal I was expecting in 11.0. It's not built to be that. It's built to be part one. So buckle up. You know, the ride will be, I hope, insane and insanely fulfilling. Going back to that promise of the 20th anniversary of World of Warcraft, like, I want this saga to feel like it is just the perfect crescendo of 20 years of storytelling, you know, as we said at BlizzCon.
Yeah, there is a sense that we are fulfilling something. The 20 years came and will end this November. I guess November's launch, right? Yeah, 20-year anniversary will be this November. Yeah. And there is a feeling, I can tell you from the player side, of really coming to something special. And I know that puts pressure on the team when players collectively have an idea that they think should happen, and then the team's like, well, we're kind of going a different way. But I don't know that I've felt this much positive feedback in a long time about just where things are headed. And nobody says that about a 20-year-old property usually. Usually we're like,
there's not a lot of precedent we have, right? Like that's the same contiguous project. There's plenty of game series run for 20 years, no question. But like, it is honestly a blessing and a, you know, often sometimes a hindrance. Just trying to, you know, sift through the sheer volume of all of these details. Poor Sean Copeland, right? You know, just trying to keep it all, you know, make it all make sense. But it is also its principal strength. You know, particularly because it's an MMO and a video game, because you've lived these moments. You didn't just passively watch. You didn't just, you know, read a book or watch a movie. You've lived these moments and they matter and there are stakes, you know, so as complex as it is to try and push the world forward without breaking everything that came before, which is its own kind of challenge. It's a very noble challenge, right? It's a privilege to tread water in this complexity of this setting. After all of these years, it's amazing that it's still the same stakes. It's still the same world that you've always known.
Well, there's a future I see where you're, you know, reclining in some sort of chair.
With the blanket over my knees,
blanket over your knees,
fire,
keeping you warm, and you're looking back and you're thinking...
Telling kids to stay off my lawn.
Yeah, exactly. And they're all in their haptic suits playing whatever version of WoW they have. And looking back at Grandpa's accomplishments, and I think it looks like something to be pretty proud of already. Well, I, for one, could not be more excited about this next expansion and the entirety of the world Soul Saga, and I think you and your team should be proud, and I wish you guys nothing but luck in the next few weeks.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much, Scott. It was good fun. That was hard. We're never gonna get that.
Minchia. Molto bene. Molto bene. Bella intervista. Non mi aspettavo di meno. Non ha detto tantissimo. Within ha detto molto il giusto. Ti ha lasciato con... Ma porca puttana, poteva dire di più. No, perché sta per uscire. -2. Ha detto il giusto, cioè è andato più sull'emozionale. Molto bene. Pausina. Ci sta.